Hey folks, welcome back to Honey Money SG. Today, I will be sharing my thoughts about retiring in Malaysia. Now, I know a lot of people have been interested in this kind of topic about retiring in another place compared to Singapore. Because while Singapore is actually a really great place to work, we have high income, we have a lot of job opportunities, but maybe it's not a really great place to retire because the cost of living here is really too high. And in most recent news, we can't even import freshly chilled chickens from Malaysia. So a lot of people has been contemplating whether they want to retire in Singapore or not. So I'll be here to just share my thoughts about retiring in Malaysia regarding lifestyle, the cost, the living habits that you have to adapt to. It will not be a really in-depth research, but I'll just share what I have here, right? So let's start with the cost of living in Malaysia. I'm sure as Singapore residents, we can all agree that Malaysia is a really cheap place to live in because 1 SGD is almost equivalent to 3.2 Malaysian ringgit right now. I know previously we are always talking about 1:3, 1:3, but now the Malaysian ringgit has been so weak that Singapore dollars has appreciated over it close to 3.2, That's quite a good arbitrage opportunity. Let's talk about property first. And if you really want to compare it to Malaysia, it's really no comparison, right? I mean, let's just take a look at the private condominium nearest to Singapore, the R&F residences. I was just looking the other day at Property Guru Malaysia. So if you are like renting a 3-bedroom apartment in R&F Cove, it is actually around 2,000 ringgit per month. And if we really convert it back to Singapore dollars, how much are we talking about? Maybe 600 over Singapore dollars for a 3-bedroom private condominium apartment with facilities. Of course, you can't compare the same level of quality between Malaysia condominiums and Singapore condominiums because Malaysian condominiums, most of them are poorly maintained after a few years because there's just so much land to build property. But I'm just giving you like a simple cost comparison, right? How much can you get in Singapore versus how much you could get in Malaysia? But if you want to rent a property in Singapore, maybe a 3-bedroom private condominium will cost you like 3,000, 4,000 or even $5,000 a month depending on your location. So that's just the price disparity, right? And let's talk a bit about transportation. And as you know, public transportation is almost inexistent in Malaysia unless you're in big cities like Kuala Lumpur or Penang. So I think it's better to always drive your own private transport. With like 30,000 ringgit, you can easily get a Pearl 2 Myvi. And in Singapore, you don't even need to think about it because we have something called Certificate of Entitlement that allows you to use your vehicle for 10 years. And that paper itself is already costing like 70,000 Singapore dollars. And if you add the car price in with the COE, it's probably coming to like 120,000 Singapore dollars to allow you to use the car for 10 years. Whereas vehicles in Malaysia, no expiry, no time limit, just use as long as you want it. Also, because the cost of living is cheaper in Malaysia, the wages are also lower, right? That means the services that you can do there is much cheaper as well. You want to go for hairdressing services, you want to go for massage services, you want to like relax in a villa, you want to enjoy exotic and luxurious food options. There's also quite plenty of options within your budget. So it's really like a lifestyle change and quality change, right? Not really about the cost, but about how much more you could get with the same amount of money. And don't even get me started on food because subjectively, Malaysian food is the best for me in Southeast Asia. At least it's really the locals handling all the cooking, unlike in Singapore where a lot of foreigners are really managing our hawker and food court stores. But cost is not really everything, right? We have to look into other aspects of life because if cost is just a concern, then I think you underrated one very important benefit of Singapore, and that is the safety. Now, Singapore is touted as one of the safest nations or even cities in the world. That means that as a single female traveler, you can actually go out in the midnight and it's really safe to walk on our streets. I can't say the same for any other kind of cities in this world, but for Singapore, I can vouch that you will be safe as long as you walk within the main roads. Not only that, we also have a high level of security. Our police officers and civil defense firefighters are one of the most ready force in Singapore. And because Singapore is so small, right, if anyone commits a crime, you can be sure that they will be captured within 24 hours because of our tight security systems. Anyway, with regards to healthcare, at least I could say that Singapore has a high level of healthcare standard, but Malaysia is not low either. In fact, if you look at the private healthcare services in Malaysia, some of them are really quite good. on par with Singapore, just that the cost is much cheaper. In Singapore, if you don't even have a private medical insurance or integrated shield plan, be prepared to fork out really large amount because your MediShield Life is just not going to cover the entire expensive medical bills. So I read online somewhere that some hospitals even accept Medisave for payment because they have linkages with the Singapore government or something like that. So if you are interested in the area, you can do more research on that lah. But now I do want to talk a bit about the lifestyle difference because fundamentally you are changing a city lifestyle to a more laid-back lifestyle in Malaysia. I'm not talking about big cities like Kuala Lumpur. I mean, if you really want to retire in Kuala Lumpur, there's really not much difference from that with Singapore. I would rather you live in Singapore if you prefer city life because the traffic is really insane at Kuala Lumpur. Don't say I never warned you. Now, if you do want to retire and escape from the city lifestyle of Singapore, really just explore a few options other than Kuala Lumpur. Even Penang is a much better place, more laid back, the people are nicer. Even in Johor Bahru, I think the lifestyle will be a good change from Singapore's as well because it's really hectic right here in Singapore. You don't really feel really relaxed. I think everybody is just having a really fast pace of life that keeps you moving, you know. Like if you're not moving, you just feel really left out from the society. And because you're living in Malaysia and you most likely have a private vehicle, you can really drive to scenic spots that are not accessible by public transport. If you want to go to like a water quarry, you want to go to the national park, you want to go to other states to explore their food, their culture, the people, the language, I think it's a very diverse culture in Malaysia. So Malaysia is really a very rich place of culture and food, if you ask me. A lot of places that you can explore. The country is so big, right? If you don't like living in this city, you can just move to a neighboring one or somewhere up further north ahead so that you can just explore different lifestyles and see which one suits you better. Lastly, let's talk a bit about the visa requirements and tax, right? Because I think this is the fundamental thing that you should look out for if you're considering retirement. Because as a Singapore passport holder, you can only stay in Malaysia for 30 days via a social visit or tourist visa. But if you want to stay longer than 30 days, you do have to look for longer term options. And one of it is the MM2H, Malaysia My Second Home. And the MM2H policy has been changed to such ridiculous terms like you need a minimum of 40,000 ringgit per month to be qualified to apply for the MM2H visa. I mean, if someone is earning 40,000 Malaysian ringgit, which translates to around 13,000 Singapore dollars, why would he not retire in Singapore instead? $13 can do wonders in Singapore. But one thing you must know is that there is another policy of MM2H which is under the Sarawak state. If you go and Google for MM2H Sarawak, I think they have a different set of requirements that is much more lenient than the official MM2H visa. So you can consider that route if you want to apply for MM2H. And we cannot forget tax residency if you are still earning an income to supplement your retirement life. Fundamentally, we still want to remain as a Singapore tax resident. And the eligibility to remain as a Singapore tax resident is that you need to stay at least 183 days in Singapore. That means you cannot travel so much across the world that you don't qualify to be a Singapore tax resident. Because I think Singapore tax is one of the lowest in the world, right? I mean, I would very much want to remain as a Singapore tax resident as long as I am drawing income from Singapore. So there is something that you have to figure out if you want to consider retiring in Malaysia. So to conclude, right, living in Malaysia, retiring there has its pros and cons compared to Singapore. You really have to weigh your costs and benefits to see which one is more advantageous for you. Now, I'm speaking it from a single perspective or maybe no kids perspective because it also means you and your partner can really move around easily. But what if you have kids? I think that will change the whole equation because where are your kids going to live? Where are they going to school? Are they going to go to the school in Malaysia or Singapore? I think that's just some family matters that are more complicated than what my video is discussing. This is probably my last video in Singapore before I move to Malaysia, and I will definitely miss this park for filming. Yes, the official announcement is out. I'll be moving temporarily to Malaysia, at least for a very long period. And if you folks are familiar with my channel, you wouldn't have known that my top viewed video, most popular video, must have been I'm considering to retire in Malaysia. So like I said, what I say, I will do. What I do, I will say. But am I retiring? Definitely not. It's not a full-scale retirement. I'm starting to scale back, which also means that I don't want to work so hard. So you can consider that semi-retiring. But before I go into the specific details, right, come and join us with over 9,000 members at my Telegram group at Honey Money SG to connect with like-minded individuals that can help you on your financial independence journey. So for this video, there's really no script. I'm just going to record it like I do in a podcast. But let's talk on the first topic about work. what is going to happen to my work. And as many of you have known, I've taken this YouTube full-time content creator route since February this year. I quit my full-time corporate MNC job to do this business full-time. And I've been hustling in this business for like 6 to 7 months now. And it's relatively stable, I would say. But I guess when you're working for yourself versus working for someone, you'll put in additional effort. And in fact, more than 100% because you'll work beyond the normal 8 to 5 hours because it is your own baby, right? It's your own hustle. The more you do, the more you earn. But you see, here's the thing. I've been going on this hustle, churning videos, taking up marketing campaigns, doing content, and then engaging my community, and sometimes working beyond 12 hours a day, 6 to 7 days a week. To me, this is not sustainable in the long run, but it was essential, especially in the first few months of the business. So now that the business is much more stable compared to the initial months, I'm starting to scale back a bit, reducing the churn rate of the videos and maybe outsource some tasks to other people who can help, because I definitely do not want to reach a stage where I overwork and burn out. And now with the additional time, I'm already thinking how to spend my time. And you see, the good thing about being a content creator is that you are not limited by your location. You are not limited by geography or space because you can move to anywhere and continue making content. And that is essentially what I'm looking forward to, remote working or digital nomad. And Malaysia happens to be my preferred place of choice. So I guess for those people who love to work from home or work from anywhere or work remote, then this reason should not be too hard to comprehend because you will feel that working in Singapore is really quite tough. Like a change of environment is always good, so I decided to move to Malaysia and work remote. So the second main reason I wanted to move to Malaysia is definitely the lifestyle. And I'm sure many of you can definitely relate with this because living in Singapore is really tough. Things are really expensive. There's high population density, there's not much space to move around, people are more uptight, and hence you see more weird happenings, especially in the area of Yishun. So yes, a change in the environment is definitely better for the lifestyle. And where is a better place than Malaysia, where people love to chiong to Johor Bahru every weekend just to spend 3.4x. And like I said, if I'm reducing the churn rate of my videos, I will have more time to spare. But with more time to spare, what am I going to do about it? I mean, Singapore has been a place where I literally explored almost every part of it. There isn't like any suburbs to go and do domestic tourism. Like if you stay in Punggol, you want to go Jurong East. So I guess the change of lifestyle will be really good. I want to experience what is living in Malaysia like, living with different people, different mindsets, different races, and also definitely on a larger space because you will know that Singapore property prices are insane. Like, if you want to buy a property, it's crazily expensive. Just as I explained in my past 2 videos on how much salary you should have to buy a condominium or a HDB. So currently in Singapore, I'm waiting for my HDB flat to be completed next year. And while I'm waiting for that, I'm still living with my parents in a 3-room HDB. So the fact here is, the space is really limited and it's not conducive enough for me to do my business plus live in there. And I definitely will want some bigger space to roam around and maybe expand my mind a little on the creativity side. Now, if I talk about the people of Malaysia, because I guess they are one of the most friendliest and polite people I've ever met. Even if both of you are strangers to each other, they will often greet and smile at you. And when I visit the restaurants, retail, shopping spaces, the staff are mostly local Malaysians, so I could have a small conversation with them to know how life is like. And the people there are really quite genuine, like they really want to make friends with you. Not saying that Singapore is really bad, but if you look at our retail and F&B scene, most of the staff are really foreigners and you can't really strike a conversation with them because they are already so busy and overworked and maybe underpaid. So it's definitely very different from what you see or feel in Malaysia. I also want to talk about driving because driving in Singapore is almost impossible. I covered in the previous video how much salary you need to buy a car. And to me, to be able to afford a car, you need to shelf out at least 2.5k per month. That is on top of your daily lifestyle expenses. So are you willing to shelf out 2.5k? I know I'm not willing to, but in Malaysia, driving is essential and it's part and parcel of your transportation mode. You see, I've gotten my Singapore driving lessons for over 10 years ago and I've never drove since because in Singapore, you don't really need a car, but in Malaysia, it is essential. And now that I've never driven for over 10 years, I need some time to get back my driving skills. So I guess it's about time to get back my driving skills, especially in Malaysia, where you really need to drive from point A to B everywhere. Now let's talk about the food. And I'm going to trigger a war here between Singaporeans and Malaysians because both sides are going to argue which food is better. I think food is very a subjective topic. Like I have discussed this point with Kelvin Learn Investing in the previous interview. And I fully agree with his point because he mentioned that the hawker stores in Malaysia generally have better quality in terms of the food, the portion and the price. But if you want to talk about F&B dining in restaurants, I think Singapore will have a better quality because all the good chefs will fly over to Singapore to work because of the better pay, better better living conditions and better benefits as well. Better recognition even for them to step up and go to the next level. And so far, based on my experience, it's really true. Like if you want to go to the high-end restaurants, Singapore is really top-notch. But if you want to dine at really cheap places like coffee shops or hawker stores, then I think Malaysia will have a better pick out there. But again, this is just my very own subjective view. Don't fight in the comment section. So I want to wrap up this video is that it is a real privilege to be able to work remote because not many people can do it even if they want to. The companies do not allow them to. And it's 100% not possible without you folks watching and supporting my content creation journey for the past 2 to 3 years. So thank you to everyone from the bottom of my heart. Remember, this is just a temporary move. I will still come back occasionally to settle some things here and there. It has finally come full circle. In 2022, I talk about my plans to move and semi-retire in Malaysia, and that is still my most viewed video till date. Then in 2023, when I announced my departure from Singapore to move to Malaysia, that has also been a hit. So now, I finally come to the last leg of the video, which is in 2024, because I am finally returning to Singapore from Malaysia. Now, just to give a quick update on the Singapore dollars to Malaysian ringgit exchange rate, right now is hovering around 3.2 something. But I remember last year when I left Singapore for Malaysia in September 2023, the exchange rate was around 3.4-ish. So now, Singapore dollars have deteriorated against Malaysian ringgit. Is that my reason to return to Singapore? Definitely not lah. I mean, if you take a look at the video that I made in 2022, right? Back then, the exchange rate was 3.2 something or so. So right now, 2024 exchange rate is almost equivalent to 2022's exchange rate. There is really no significant changes in terms of the way you will live and spend in Malaysian ringgit. So that is not the big reason. Now, what is then the big reason? I think I need to provide some background context, especially if you are new to the channel and this is the first video you are viewing from my channel. Then you can join over 17,000 members interested in personal finance, building their wealth, semi-retirement, credit cards, CPF, and all that in the Honey Money SG Telegram group for free. So click on this link. Now, for the context, I'm 100% Singaporean, so I'm only staying temporarily in Malaysia. And this has always been the plan. It's never about permanently stationing myself in Malaysia. And the main reason is because for Singaporeans who want to buy public housing, or we call that the HDB flat, especially if we bought the BTO flat called build to order, which means that we pre-order the flat from the government board, we will need to have a waiting time for the building to construct. And for my case, it was 5 years, which meant that my housing will only be completed in the year of 2024. And I started making plans since 2022 to talk about my shift and move to temporarily in Malaysia. So now 2024 has come and my flat has been completed. So this is my main reason to move back to Singapore. But let's talk about what are the initial reasons that make me left Singapore, right? I know that cost has always been a huge concern, especially if you are living in Singapore. You will realize that housing prices are getting insane. And what does housing prices translate to? Rent. Especially if you want to stay by yourself and have more freedom, you want to rent a room outside, that will cost like at least 1,000 Singapore dollars upwards for a common room. And I haven't even factored in all the inflation that is caused by either COVID, supply chain issues, war issues, that is really raising the cost of living that you will have in Singapore. Not that you can't enjoy a good life, but the same money can only enjoy a mediocre level of life. So in order to use the same amount of Singapore dollars to enjoy a better life, I think it is a good option to move to Malaysia and enjoy the lower cost of living. Now, to be clear, I have nothing against Singapore cost of living because I know that everyone has to bear some cost in one way or another. But here's the thing, right? I have the freedom and option to choose where I want to spend my money on. And if I were to spend the same Singapore dollars currency amount, would I rather spend it in Malaysia or Singapore? I guess the answer is quite clear in terms of numerical sense. In Singapore, with 1,000 Singapore dollars a month, you can only enjoy a very basic level of living just for sustenance. But if you take the 1,000 Singapore dollars and convert to Malaysian ringgit and you stay in Malaysia, you could probably live much better. But I agree that money is not always the determining factor. I guess the other factor is space. And in space, that comes with privacy as well. You see, in Singapore, we are definitely a very small nation. You see, the houses we live in cannot be compared to what you have in Malaysia, right? Malaysia has so much more land, so many more cities, and people can really roam around to another city to travel, to sightsee, or even do like their own staycations locally. In Singapore, where can you go? Punggol to Jurong, then Sentosa, then Pulau Ubin. That's about it. So if you want to enjoy a higher sense of space, and you want to drive around, you want to explore other suburbs other than KL, Penang, and JB or Malacca, then maybe coming to Malaysia, you can enjoy some of these smaller towns that has a much more chill and relaxed vibe. Then back in Singapore, maybe some of you are mostly staying with parents, which also meant that there is less privacy if you want to start a family with your partner, with your wife. Are you going to stay with your own parents and have some in-laws, these arguments? I think these are all things that you have to factor in. And number three is, of course, the people. I guess Malaysians are really a very good bunch of people. You see, a lot of them are really very chill, and even though they may not have as high income as Singaporeans, but they generally live a quite happy life. And at least in the suburban area where I am living in, the people are more genuine, like they are really locals. They are not like foreign or migrant workers coming here to make a living. Whereas in Singapore, most of the service crew and the staff that you see are mostly foreigners really. And that's because Singaporeans don't want to do those jobs, what? It's natural. Which also brings me to the point of population density. So in the suburban area, there is much less population over a wide area. People are less tense up lah. People are more generally more opening. Very humble living people lah. They could do with very little income and still live a good life. And they don't really like chase or compare salary, compare income, compare your status. They don't really care. As long as you're living an okay life, you don't need to be the richest person in the city. So these are some good parts about living in Malaysia, right? But let's talk about what are some things that I miss in Singapore. Number one is, of course, efficiency. Now, you see, Singapore is well known for its fast-paced environment and efficiency. You can get a lot of things settled within the day. And because the space is so small, the nation is quite packed, you can do a lot of things within one area. Even if you take public transport, all of this can be settled within a day or two. Like I could settle 3 errands within a lunch trip, Eat my lunch, go and buy some grocery, get a haircut. All can be done within one trip. But in Malaysia, because of the land space, right, all these shops are spread far apart. It's not likely you can walk from one to another unless you are in the city center. You have to drive from one point to another, and that means you also have to look for parking. So efficiency is definitely something that I miss in Singapore, that you can do all in one rather than traveling here and there. But I guess that's the price to pay for efficiency versus space. Number two thing that I miss in Singapore, which is the walkway and infrastructure. At least in the suburban area, Malaysia really has no visible walkways or pathways for pedestrians to walk on. And don't even think me mention shelter walkways. You got walkway already very good, still want shelter. That is only exists in Singapore. In Singapore, some of these roads, I don't think anybody walk, but still got shelter one. Singapore government really take care of its citizens one. Make sure there's proper walkway and sometimes help you segregate bicycle lane and walkway lane. And it's a very distinct path apart from the vehicle road. In Malaysia, most of the times you have to walk on the vehicle road. Not to mention the safety. And the matter of fact is, I cannot clock my steps as effectively in Malaysia because firstly, you have to drive around, right? Secondly, there's no walkway, so my step count is really very little. And I can show you. Now, you see, this is one of the only few walkways where I could really walk in peace. No cars, no motorcycles, no dogs barking at me. And this is a gated and guarded estate. I don't really live here, I just live nearby. But you see, that's the beauty of walking around in Singapore, right? You have fully sheltered walkways with very safe pathways for you to walk. But that's not the case in Malaysia. So really, when I'm back in Singapore, I'm just going to do more walking and appreciate the infrastructure that Singapore has for us. And look at all these very nice semi-D houses. Actually, they are not that expensive compared to what they have in JB. But it's too late. The prices have already inflated like more than 50% since they were built. Number three thing that I miss in Singapore is mosquito-free. I don't know how Singapore makes it so clean that we rarely have mosquitoes nowadays. And even if we do, we have like a dengue fever area. The government will put like the red alert, this zone. And then they will do like extra cleaning, extra sanitation, extra filming, and make sure the mosquito really die. Like in Singapore, I never suffered from any mosquito injury before. But in Malaysia, it's like very common because the sanitary may not be so good, the drainage may be choked, and then the mosquito breed in these ponds, which is a very common thing outside of Singapore in common nations. I just don't know how Singapore keep it so clean, And the number four thing that I miss in Singapore is definitely the connections and events. You see, having me based in Malaysia, I have a lot of excuse to not attend events, but that also means that I also cannot attend some events that I really want to attend because I have to make the trip down. And I know that this is a first world problem lah. So for those of you partners, clients, or whoever that I'm meeting in Singapore, I really have to make the trip down one. So that means I really treasure you a lot. But let's address the main question of why am I able to move to Malaysia, right? And that's fundamentally because of the reason that I could work remote. I could work digitally. I could deliver my products online. Especially on this YouTube channel, I work with several financial institutions as well as banks and reward partners. So if you're able to work remote, generate an income by delivering a service online, I think you have a very good option. But I come to realize that some people in Singapore are very bitter and sour about this. Usually, they will label those people who move away from Singapore to achieve a better life to become quitters, right? In the comment section, they will say that you can't even handle life in Singapore. How are you going to handle life abroad? Okay, I get a lot of these comments because whenever I mention that how life is better in Malaysia, then there will be a lot of dislike already. Like a lot of Singaporeans really live by that Singapore is the best country. Yes, I still believe Singapore is a very good country, but are there instances that other cities or nations do better than Singapore in some aspects? Also, yes, I think having lived more than 1 year in Malaysia made me learn to appreciate Singapore more. Like the things that Singapore do really well in, the points that I mentioned earlier, I learned to really appreciate what Singapore has done for its people, rather than complaining and bickering about the everyday Singaporean issues. At the same time, living abroad has also helped me understand better about another country in Malaysia. Like you are living as a minority race, so you better be sure of what you want to do and what you want to say, because there will be consequences. Unlike in Singapore, there's much more liberal and freedom in terms of the race and religious issues. So what is next on my plan? I guess coming back to Singapore is really to settle my own HDB flat first. I need to settle the renovation, which means a lot of money needs to be spent. And I will continue to discuss on the best payment strategies, especially how you should finance your flat, how you should finance your renovation. And it's a huge decision-making process, which I will do up some series of video to show you how do I come up with the process to make my decision on how to pay and what to pay with. So there will be a following home series on renovation, as well as some CPF, cash and credit card discussions on adulting. I guess that's what many people are really tuning in for. Like they need someone to guide them on making the best decision. I would say I'm the best decision maker, but I'll show you my reasoning behind it to help. So some reflections about my 1 year life. This is probably my last video recorded in Malaysia, unless I come back from a certain period and bring my camera and recording setup. But I guess thank you to Malaysia. I think you have treated me very well in terms of the people, the places, the country, and whatever it offers. And to put it clear, in my 1 year life of living in Malaysia, I have never once felt unsafe or faced any kind of cultural or racism. So whatever rumors or news that you hear online happen to a very small group of people who are really unfortunate. And I'm lucky to be fortunate not to be this group of people. Advice for other visitors coming to Malaysia: firstly, stay low profile. Don't dress like you are some rich Singaporean or whatever. And don't bring your Singaporean habits or wherever you are from to Malaysia, because when you are in other country, go and respect their rules. Live by the local people, speak their language, and blend in. Don't everything say cheap. I really hate Singaporeans who come here every day say cheap one. Luckily, the place I'm living in are not filled with Singaporeans like JB. Always respect other people's culture and race and whatever the government is doing for them. You are not living in their shoes. You will not understand how they feel. So you just live your own life and mind your own business lah. So that will conclude my 3-year Malaysia series. 2022 was the plan, 2023 was the execution, and 2024 was the return. Onwards to my next chapter on building a home in Singapore. And if you really want to know what are 5 things that I realized after living in Malaysia for a few months back then I can show you my reflections on the video right here.